Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reading 5 fantasies that I forgot I owned. Now, the idea for this video came to me as I was reorganizing my bookshelves most recently. I'll leave a link to that video in the description down below. And as I was organizing my bookshelves, I realized, wow, there is a lot of stuff on my shelves that I just didn't remember buying, I didn't remember owning, and I didn't even really remember being books. I mean, I'm not saying I completely forgot that The Selection by FAQS existed, but some of these books I was like, wow, I vaguely remember this being published, but why the fuck do I own it? So today's video, I am going to endeavor to read these 5 fantasies that I kind of conveniently forgot about. And I think it's going to be fun because these 5 fantasy novels, as compared to my most recent I Read 5 fantasy video, they're YA fantasies. I think they're going to be more my speed. I think they're going to be more enjoyable, perhaps, than some of those boring ass adult fantasies I read. That remains to be seen, honestly. Like, we shall see. These could be complete garbage, hot fire, dumpster status, but we're gonna find out today. We're keeping things slightly informal, as you can see, because I'm right here. I'm not gonna be giving you synopses for any of these books, simply because I think the fact that I forgot about them, that I forgot that I own them, I kind of don't even know what they're about, I think that will be part of the fun of this video, is finding out what these books are about as I read them. I'm not gonna read the synopsis before even like stepping into the book. I'm not gonna read the synopsis to you. So I'm just gonna let you know the 5 titles of the books that we're gonna be reading, and we can see if I like these books and if they are worthy of remembrance. So first up, we have The Selection by FAQS. This is a book that I don't really remember buying. I think I have some vague notions of like, oh, I was gonna read this for like a, popular books video, like, do people like this book? Do I like this book? I don't know. I really don't know why I have this book, but I'm gonna be reading The Selection by FAQS. In a similar vein, we have Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. This one I feel like has a fair amount of hype and like love around it still, so I'm curious to see what this is all about. I literally know nothing, except for apparently the ships are fun, so we're gonna read this. I also have Four Dead Queens by, can't remember the author's name. You can see it right here. Don't know what this is about. I know that my friend Heather from Aphrodite Reads really liked this book. That's all I know. I picked this up because it was popular. Similar to that one is also Effortless, which I thought was a standalone fantasy, but I think upon doing like brief research, this was actually a duology, a duet. I don't have the second book. I'm not gonna pick up the second book, but this is a book. And then I have Courting Darkness by Robin Lefevers, who wrote a trilogy that I really enjoyed. And we're gonna see if this book is any good. I'm ready. Are you ready? Buckle up. Let's get vlogging. Let's read these books and see if they're any good? Question mark. Okay, we're off to a start. I am 40-ish% into Effortless, and I have to say, compared to some of the books that I read for my last fantasy video, this one is actually keeping my attention, which I'm very happy with. I definitely anticipated the reads for this video to be a little bit easier to sink my teeth into, simply because they are all YA fantasy, but I wasn't really sure what to think because I feel like some of these titles, are forgettable, right? But this one is keeping my interest, even if the characters aren't doing anything for me, really. So this book is about our main character, Jules, and she, at the start of the story, is kind of living in poverty, and she's kind of giving Farah and or Katniss vibes. She's living in this tiny village, and she and her father are kind of struggling to make ends meet, and they are selling basically years of their life and or their blood to be able to pay the rent. And that is the currency in this world. You sell years of your life or months of your life or days of your life, basically time. You sell time, wow, to be able to live and survive. And I guess the ruling family in this sort of like realm, we don't know anything about the greater world and if the greater world is different, but in this particular realm, there is this palace called Effortless, and it is where the ruling family lives, and they kind of have lived forever. The queen, we're told, has been alive for as long as people can remember, centuries, and we don't really know that much about what is keeping her alive. I mean, we're assuming, right, that it is the years that she is taking from the people, but we don't really know about the mechanics of the system. And honestly, I will say, this book is very fast-paced, and there's a lot going on and a lot of questions being raised, though I will say that the world building is a little weak and the characters aren't very strong. I know very little about Jules except for that she really cares about her father. She ends up going to work at the Effortless Palace because I don't really know at the beginning. I think it's so that she can earn money for her family. Dad is like, you can't sell years of your life for me or whatever, and she's like, okay, fine. So she's gonna go work at Effortless, even though her father's like, you don't want to go there. Don't let them see who you are. We're assuming probably that Jules has some sort of hidden identity or some sort of secret that she doesn't even know about because of the way that her dad is speaking to her. And we got a reveal at this 40% mark, a twist that I definitely saw coming. I'm not going to spoil that for you because I'm not spoiling the books in this vlog, but already juicy things are happening. We also have 2, in my opinion, potential love interests. We have Liam and Rowan. Rowan is a guy that Jules grew up with. He is engaged to the princess. I want to say that Effortless is a palace that, like, let's say like the Duke and Duchess live at, and then there's like a queen, and so the prince of Duke and Duchess is going to marry the queen's daughter or something like that. It's not like interfamily marrying, if you will. I think that's part of the problem with the book, is like I don't fully understand the details, not because I'm not paying enough attention, but because it's a little bit too fast with the world being explained to us. It's like the author assumes that we're just going to know all of the details very quickly, and that hasn't really been the case. But we do have, like I said, Rowan, who is betrothed to the princess, and then we also have his evil brother Liam, who tried to kill him back in the day, like tried to throw him in a fire, I want to say. And Jules used to live at Effortless with her father. They left sort of in a hurry unexpectedly a while ago, and then they've been living in that village ever since, and her dad's like, don't go back, blah, blah, blah. So Jules did know Rowan. She was like friends with him growing up, and so she kind of has a crush on him. She kind of likes him, and she's really scared of Liam. And I'm assuming we're going to find out that Liam's really not that bad of a guy. Like, he's hiding something, and he's going to be a potential love interest. So it's definitely formulaic. It's definitely nothing like groundbreaking, but it is a very entertaining fantasy. And I think if you're in the mood for just like basic YA fantasy, pick this up. I'm having a good time with it, and I don't anticipate this being like a 5-star read or anything, but it doesn't need to be. Not every book has to be a 5-star read to be enjoyable. There's levels to this shit. Clearly, I mean, it's a 5-star scale. So anyway, I'm gonna continue reading this book. I'll probably just update you when I'm finished, simply because I don't anticipate there being like wild twists. I mean, there might be wild twists. I'm kind of hoping there's wild twists, but seeing as I'm not trying to spoil it, I'll be back when I'm done, and I'll let you know my final thoughts and whether or not I think that you should read this book that I honestly forgot that I owned. Okay, so I ended up finishing Effortless last night. Also, apologies in advance. Well, I say apologies in advance. I know a lot of you probably won't care. I care as someone who has to like watch this footage back again, but a lot of the clips for this video are going to be filmed right here in the same place because I am currently redoing part of my office, which is going to happen in another vlog probably that you've already seen, but I am just kind of stuck in the bedroom. I have a makeshift office set up, and I am just listening to audiobooks here and updating you here. So anyway, let's talk about Effortless, and then we can talk about Red Queen, which I've also started. Effortless turned out to be just okay. I think I'm still going to stick with a 3-star rating, as I was kind of thinking that I might give it when I first started reading. There are definitely things that needed to be improved about the writing of this book, but ultimately I thought it was a pretty fun time, and I think the world was inventive enough to keep me entertained. I think the main issue that I had with this book, and the thing that made this book not a 4 or 5-star read, was that there were so many questions posed and not very many questions answered. And I understand that it is the first book in a duology, but I still think that having some of the questions answered, or more of the questions answered in this book, would have made for a more interesting reading experience. It did sort of just feel like setup for the second book. Whenever I went to look at the reviews for the second book to see if I potentially wanted to pick it up, a lot of people said that everything wrapped up a little bit too quickly and too neatly. That's just not what I'm looking for. I want this interesting world to be fully fleshed out, and I want a lot of my questions to be answered. I will say, to the credit of this author, I think she did the twists really, really well. There were 2 twists that I really didn't see coming. I mean, there were a couple of twists that I also thought were not really twists and or were reveals I was expecting, but 2 of the reveals were pretty interesting and were things that I just didn't see coming. So I think she did a really good job with that. I think if you are just looking for a bog standard fantasy, this might be worth picking up, though I will say I'm actually enjoying Red Queen more. So let's go ahead and talk about that one. Red Queen is a book that I think is really, really popular on the internet. I think this one won the Goodreads Choice Award in 2015, if I'm remembering the Goodreads page correctly for this book. I think with good reason. This book is very well paced and plotted. I'm already seeming to care more about Mare than I cared about Jules in the last book, which I think says a lot, because I think a lot of effort was made in the last book to make us try to care for Jules, and I just never really fully got there. But this book, I'm already really invested in Mare and her life. So this story has a very similar setup to Effortless, which I think is so funny. I put in my audiobook and I was like, wait, is this a different book? It doesn't feel different because the setup is almost identical. So we have Mare at the start of the story. She is living in this kind of poor town because she is a red, and there are reds and silvers in this world. Reds are humans with seemingly normal lives and abilities. Silvers are humans who I think have silver blood, and they are powerful in various different ways. There's some people who are able to control animals or control nature or various other sorts of things. I don't know. There's a bunch of different ranges, I guess, of powers in this world, and silvers are the only ones that seem to be thriving. If you're a red, you're likely to be poor, you're likely to die early, and I think in particular Mare has gray tipped hair because of the poor conditions she's living in. So she's not having a super great time. We find out pretty quickly that she is just trying to make ends meet with her family. Her dad, I think, suffered an injury due to a war that he was conscripted into, I believe. Her 2 elder brothers are fighting in this war, and essentially in this society, if you don't end up becoming an apprentice, you do get conscripted into the war. So Mare is trying to help her family survive and bring home money and or like stolen goods, and also to, avoid conscription, because who wants to go and die in a war that they don't really believe in? We haven't gotten gotten the full story on what this war is about, but I think it's pretty clear to us that the war in general is for the silvers to, I guess, maintain their wealth. I think it's about two separate like silver countries or something fighting each other, or the silvers of two different countries fighting each other, and so the reds are forced to fight for something that doesn't really affect them in any sort of meaningful way, except for the fact that like they're going to die on the battlefield. And there's just a lot of uncertainty in Mare's life. She is again trying to survive. Her best friend was supposed to become an apprentice, but some shit happens and he is unable to become an apprentice, and so she's also having to worry about him. And there's just a lot unfolding, a lot going on. Through a series of events, Mare ends up going to work at, I think, the palace, very similar to Effortless, where we have Jules going work at Effortless. And this is the way that Mare is going to avoid conscription. She gets into a scuffle as she was like trying to steal something, I want to say. She is saved out of her predicament by some random guy she doesn't know, and he's like, hey, I can hook you up with a job at the palace. And she's like, okay, anything to avoid being put into this war. And so she is working at the palace, and right now we are at the 20% mark, and we are at a very pivotal moment, I want to say, in the story, and I'm excited to see where things go. I think this book is a very prototypical like 2010s fantasy. I can tell it's got a little bit of Hunger Games energy in there. It's also kind of reminding me a little bit of Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I have to say, like, I am enjoying the way the story is told. I am already invested in the characters. It's a YA fantasy. Am I going to give this book 5 stars? I mean, it's unlikely, though I am enjoying this one more than Effortless, so I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up giving this like a 4-star or a 5-star. I'll withhold my judgment. Things could go south from here, but this first 20% has been enough to keep me entertained and enough to invest me in this world. I will say, compared to Effortless, I think the world is a little less interesting. I liked the idea of time as currency in Effortless, but I think that the way that this world is being told to us, and just, I guess, the way the narrative is flowing, things just feel a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more well done, and I think that is just the gift of comparison. I don't know if I would have loved this book had I picked it up not after Effortless, but so far I'm having a really, really good time, so I'm just going to continue trucking, and I don't know when I'll update you next, hopefully at the 50 or 75% mark. I don't want to just like update you one more time because this feels like a really juicy story that I'm going to have a lot to say about. Oh, here he comes. I don't know if it's just like my mental health doing better or what, but I'm genuinely just having a really good time with this video, and I'm only 2 books in, which I think bodes well for the rest. I say that, like, just watch every other book suck, but I'm 50% into Red Queen, and I'm still enjoying it. I will say my enjoyment has gone down just a little bit, given that the rebel group is becoming more of a plot point in the story. We did get hints that there was a rebel group in this world. I probably should have guessed that Mare would have something to do with them, join them up, but I think this book is leaning more into the dystopian than the court politics side of things, which to me is less exciting. I'm just not really a dystopian kind of gal. I think dystopian leans a little bit more sci-fi, and I'm not as into sci-fi. I am liking the little bit of court politics and or like court machinations that we've seen. I'm also just liking Mare as a character. I don't know, she's like a fairly sympathetic character so far. The only other kind of negative thing I would say is that I've noticed there's been a couple of times when there's just unnecessary commentary. There was kind of like an ableist sort of remark, I guess, when Mare is incapacitated and she compares it to her disabled father, and she's like, I don't know how he does this, he must like hate life or something like that. I don't know, it didn't really sit right with me. There's been like a couple of times where there's been instances of little things like that, and I'm like, why is this included in the story? I guess it was written in 2015, but just something I thought I'd point out. I don't really have a lot more that I can say without spoiling the story, but I'm curious to see where Mare ends up and also who her love interest is. I'm assuming it's going to be some sort of like love triangle between the guy she's supposed to marry and the guy that she has kind of like a crush on, but I don't know. So far, like, I'm here for it. Okay, so I realized I never ended up doing a final clip for Red Queen, and I'm sort of loath to do one now simply because I didn't end up liking this book as much as I thought I was going to at the very beginning of the story. I think it was because this book felt a little bit too heavy into that sort of like sci-fi dystopian sort of thing. I could totally understand how this book appeals to a certain demographic, especially when this book came out. I feel like it was right after Hunger Games came out, and it blended a bunch of different things, right? It blended that dystopian thing also with this sort of like royal family situation. So I get it. I understand why this is popular. I just don't really feel like it turned out to be what I wanted it to be, and I think that's okay. There were certainly a lot of twists and turns at the very end of this book, but I don't feel like the story is heading in a direction that I'm excited about, and I'm really curious to see how they're going to pull off this whole like semi-love triangle situation as well. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything because I haven't really spoiled things for any of the books in this video thus far, but I just don't feel like this was a win for me. I will say, I think this book kind of of gets a lot of unfair hate. I don't think it's a terrible book. I can understand also like the dislikes that people have raised in the Goodreads reviews that I've read, but I don't think this book is like totally terrible. I think it was fun and fast paced and is one of those YA fantasies that I think you could still pick up in like 2022 and be pretty happy with, you know, again, depending on what you're looking for and what kind of story you're expecting to get, right? Like this is definitely not the most well-crafted fantasy I've ever read, but it's really fun and I feel like the romance portion of things could definitely intrigue a lot of people. So overall, not upset that I read this. I think I'm gonna give it 3 stars. It feels weird to give this one 3 stars after giving the last book 3 stars and having honestly kind of different experiences with both, but I think my overall thoughts and feelings about both of these books is 3 stars. So I'm gonna stick with that rating and let's go ahead and move on to the next book.
Man, Target parking lots are not what they used to be because I had a hard time finding a spot where someone didn't immediately pull up next to me and just sit in their car to eat their food. Which, valid, that is what I do. I come to the Target parking lot, I eat my fast food meal, and then I go into Target. I don't know why I'm telling you all of this in this fantasy reading vlog, but here I am at the Target parking lot. I have a lot of books to read today, and I did just finish one, so I'm kind of happy about that, and I thought we could talk about it. I finished Four Dead Queens by Astrid Schulte, and I didn't get to talk to you about it as I was reading. I didn't have much to say, frankly, and I don't know that I have much to say about it now, either. This was a standalone fantasy novel, which I knew going into it, and I was expecting to maybe be not totally satisfied with it, because I just feel like while I enjoy the idea of a standalone fantasy, it's kind of like a movie compared to a TV show. You're not going to get as invested in the characters, you're probably not going to care as much about what's happening around you, and it takes a very, very skilled author to be able to tell this kind of story, just like it takes a very skilled director and writer to make a movie into something that I genuinely care about after watching. This book is about 4 dead queens. It is about the 4 queens of Quadara, which is a country divided into 4 different quadrants, and each quadrant has its own sort of specialty given its geography and given the way that the culture has kind of shaped it to be. There's an agricultural portion of the country. The place that has really shitty land, I think, is the technological part of the country. There is one for arts and shit, and then there's another one that I can't really remember, maybe like the commerce. And there's a queen who rules over each of the quadrants. So there's 4 queens, they all live in this castle together, and they all rule over the lands and try to be as impartial as possible. So they never go into the cities and the country and kind of like see what's happening around them. They just kind of rule from this castle until one day one of the queens mysteriously dies and other queens start dying throughout the course of the story. Interspersed with that and interspersed with the points of view of the different queens, we also get Carolee, who is a citizen from one of the 4 quadrants. She is from the commerce quadrant, and I think her dad's like a fisherman or something like that. He is sick and he can't find a cure to his illness. Carolee is a thief and she gets kind of embroiled into some shit when she steals something that she's not supposed to. Now, I'm so torn with how to rate this book and how I feel about this book because I do feel like elements of the story were pretty fun and interesting, but I just feel like my overall reading experience was not something that I particularly enjoyed or loved. This is not a book that I want to revisit. It's not a book that I'm like, wow, this was so fucking fun. I definitely think you should pick it up. I mean, it certainly wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't something that left a lot of like warm, fuzzy feelings around. I appreciated a lot of the twists that happened at the end. While a lot of them seemed to kind of come out of left field and seemed a little bit outlandish, I knew that our author was going to have to do something like this because otherwise the story would be uninteresting. And I think that might be part of the book's downfall. I wish we had reveals throughout the story rather than in the last like 30% of the book. It is kind of a murder mystery in a way, but I don't feel like we were getting little like nuggets and clues throughout the story. It was just like, oh, I have kind of a bad feeling about this person, and then they turn out to be kind of like whodunit, and that to me is not totally satisfying, which isn't to say again that there weren't any inventive or interesting twists. I just feel like to get there it wasn't very fun and interesting. I really also didn't care about Carolee's point of view. The 4 queens were interesting and it was cool seeing how their humanity affected the way that they ruled. Each of the queens kind of had their own secrets, and getting to see those become unveiled and see how those impacted the story was interesting. I didn't really care about Carolee and her place in the story. I also didn't like the 2 guys that she kind of knows. One is a guy who was kind of helping her be a thief. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Arab and Hamill, but like maybe a little less intense and more age similar to our heroine. And then we also had Varen or Varen. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it, but he was a messenger and he teams up with Carolee to like, I don't know, kind of solve the murders. I don't know, the characters I think were really the downfall here. I liked the queens. I wanted more from the queens, even though we got a ton from them. I wasn't expecting as much from their point of view, to be honest, as we got, which I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by, but I just feel like with so much emphasis on Carolee and Varen, I was just like, hard to care about the book, and their point of view kind of like takes over, I feel like, for the majority of the middle of the book, and I was just kind of like, I wish I could bump this up beyond 3 times speed so I don't have to like listen to the shit anymore. I don't know how I feel about this one. I would say of all of the books, this was probably a least favorite, but I don't think it was bad. So part of me wants to give it a 3, but it's like, can I give 3 books in a row 3 stars and have very different feelings about all of them? It just feels a little bit weird, though I don't feel like any of the books were like 2-star material. I don't know. What I do know, though, is that we're gonna move on to the 4th book, and I think I'm gonna treat myself to a shorty. I'm gonna read The Selection by Kiera Cass. I have always wanted to read this book. Kiera Cass, if you did not know, used to make videos on YouTube where her and like a friend would pretend to be wives of the Volturi men, and they had like Italian New York accents. That's how I found them back in the day, or that's how I knew who Kiera Cass was. And when I found out she was writing a book, I was like so excited about it. I think her first one's called like The Siren or something. Anyway, The Selection is obviously her most like popular series. I think they're making a TV show, and I think this is gonna be fun and funny and maybe very, very silly, because I think it's like a fantasy bachelor or whatever. So I'm actually kind of hyped to get into this one. I am gonna go buy myself a lamp at Target first. After that, I'm gonna get into The Selection. Hopefully get through that really quickly, because it's only, I think, gonna be like 2 hours listening, maybe like 2.5. Then I need to get into Courting Darkness, which is going to be quite the doozy at 17 hours. I mean, I think it's gonna be a third of that, so more like 5 hours, but like, fuck, that's a long audiobook. And I need to read that today, because I'm posting tomorrow. I really need to get better, honestly, about like scheduling my shit, because I have not read in like 2 or 3 days. And how much easier would my life have been if I had just read these past couple of days, you know? Why make it easy when I can do it like this?
Okay, so I'm home. I found a lamp. You are sitting right in front of it, and I am 20% into The Selection by Miss Kiera Cass. I am enjoying this book. I mean, is it silly and a little stupid? And do I think I'm going to actually give this book more than 3 stars? No, certainly not. But am I having a good time with it? Yes. So far, we've gotten up until the point where America Singer, is getting selected for the selection. So the story, The Selection, is about our heroine, America Singer, and she is living in some sort of like alternative United States, maybe like very far in the future. I don't actually know what the timeline for this is, or if it's even supposed to be America. I mean, I'm assuming it is, because we talk about the Carolinas and other like, you know, states that have been transformed. Anyway, we have America, and she, at the start of the story, is part of this caste system that like all of the United States is under, where you're on a scale from 8 to 1, 8 being the lowest of the caste system, 1 being the, you know, royals, and America is a 5. She and her family are singers. That's why her last name is Singer. They are, you know, making ends meet, but they're definitely not rich or well-to-do. But her family's like, you know what? If we have our daughter be selected by the prince of, I cannot remember the name of this fucking nation that is obviously the United States, but isn't the United States, Ilya? If we have our daughter being selected in this dating competition for the royal family, maybe we can change our own luck and get into a better caste system. So they put America up for the selection, and she becomes one of 35 women, or I guess girls, who are going to vie for the attention of Prince Maxen. And this is something that America is not super interested in, because she already has a love, a slam piece, a boyfriend, if you will, named Aspen. And it's really interesting to me the level at which Miss America Singer is talking about Aspen. They are talking about marriage. She's talking about how she wants to take care of him. She is constantly sneaking him food. And Aspen, this guy that she's into, that she's kind of dating, whatever, is in a lower caste system than she is. I think he's a 6, which is, you know, you never want to marry down. Women tend to not marry down. And so Aspen's like, there's pretty much no way we can be together. And our naive girl, Miss America Singer's like, you know what? No, I love you, and we're going to be together no matter what. So, you know, therein lies the conflict, I guess, in this relationship. And I think he kind of tells her off in the last scene, or at least that's kind of what it seems like. And so I think America is like maybe a little bit more willing to participate in the selection. She doesn't think when she applies that she's even going to get selected for the selection process, but now that she is, she's going to have to go to like the capital, I'm sure, and vie for the attentions of Prince Maxen, which she claims is going to be challenging because she's no seductress, but we shall see how this goes. I'm curious to see like what conflicts arise throughout the story. I mean, obviously there's going to be sort of the love triangle thing between Aspen and America and Maxen, but is the competition itself going to be the main conflict? Is it just going to be like bitchy girls? I don't really know. I'm curious to see kind of how things unfold, and at the very least I am enjoying the way that the story is going along. I mean, the writing style is very simple. It's definitely nothing like groundbreaking, and like I said, the plot is pretty rudimentary so far. I don't really anticipate that changing, but I am curious to see if anything surprises me or if there are any twists and turns up Miss Kiera Cass's sleeve. So I am gonna keep listening, and I'll update you as I read. Good Good golly, y'all. The selection is so, pardon my French, especially if this is your favorite series, fucking stupid. I can totally understand why other people like this series, especially as sort of like a nostalgic thing, or maybe this was your Twilight. I get that. I totally get it. But wow, just so stupid. Like, nothing's happening. The characters are so flat. I don't think I could care less about descriptions of clothing and just other various My mind is kind of blown at how much needless detail we are getting. I just took a second to rack my brain trying to think of like what's happened since I last spoke to you, and not much has happened, even though I'm at the 50% mark. We've had a lot of descriptions of the other girls that are going through the selection with America. We have gotten descriptions of the clothes, the makeup, and how she's not like other girls, and she's not dyeing her hair, and she's not going to wear a lot of makeup, and she's just going to be herself. The only real developments that have happened are that America has essentially, I don't want to say proven herself to Prince Maxon, but she has told him to not call her dear, which makes her not like other girls because she doesn't want to be another girl. She doesn't want to be called the same name that he calls all of the other girls. She strikes a deal with him and is like, hey, I stand to make some money by being in this competition. If you let me stay in this competition, I'll help vet some of the other girls since I'm going to be around them more than you are, and I'll help you figure out who's going to be a good wife for you. And since this guy's kind of a puppet from what we can tell, sort of a naive little twerp, you know, makes sense that he would strike this deal and that he would need someone to help him out because he just wants to be a good guy and like wants to marry someone, whatever. I think he's supposed to be endearing, but he has no personality to speak of, so it's like, how can I feel anything towards him? We've got, you know, America being like crafty or whatever. We do at this 50% mark, like right before I clicked pause on the audiobook, get an idea that there might be some unrest in this nation that everybody is living in, which makes sense because you're in an unfair caste system and people are only in this caste system basically dependent on if their family donated enough money to this new nation when it was formed however many years ago. So like, your ancestors were cheapskates, sorry, you're kind of fucked. And we find out that there's two different rebel groups. There's some from the north and some from the south, and we don't really know what the northern group wants, but I think the south is like unhappy about the political system and the caste system. I think the south is more violent or something like that. I'm not really sure, but we're probably going to find out about their demands, I'm sure, and I'm sure that they are going to be part of the conflict. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but what I'm assuming is going to happen is that Maxon is going to be someone who like wants to break down the hierarchy and the royal family from the inside out, and he wants to get rid of the caste system, blah blah blah. Like, I'm thinking that's where we're going to go with this, and I think that America's going to get swept up in it and like, oh, he really is a good guy, maybe I should be the one to end up with him instead. And since she's having to spend time with him to tell him about the other girls, he's gonna like fall for her or whatever. So is it stupid? Yes. Is it easy to consume? Yes. Is it horrible to listen to? No. Maybe boring at times, but like, I'm entertained enough. I'm really grasping at straws here. I don't want to just compare this to Twilight, right? Because this is its own thing, but I'm trying to see what other people see in this series compared to some of the other popular series at the time. And I'm just not really seeing anything super redeeming, like, unless you just really like this idea of like glitz and glamour and like fantasy-esque bachelor. I don't really get it because I just really am not understanding America's motivations. She has no desires beyond potentially marrying Aspen. Like, what the fuck else does this girl want from her life? Like, does she have any hobbies, talents, ambition? I don't know. Maxon, I'm assuming, like I said, he's gonna probably care about his country, but that's about it. And like, where's that coming from, you know? The sense of honor, the sense of duty. I don't know. I wish I did know, because then I would find it easier to root for him. You know what I mean? It's like, at least Edward is motivated by murder. Like, that's kind of interesting, right? Like a little moral quandary. There's nothing there. So, I'm gonna stop ranting. This is, I don't want to say a children's book, but this book compared to the vast array of YA, especially it's come out in recent years, like this is definitely set apart from that in that it is so blah. And I think people know that. So many comments on my Instagram story when I said that I was currently reading this. People were like, why are you doing that to yourself? The answer is because I own it and I forgot that I owned it. I mean, valid question, because... Okay, so I finished the selection, and as I was ranting about in my last clip, this book was not good. The plot was non-existent, the characters never turned out to be very interesting, and even the attempts at conflict in the last, like, I don't know, 10-20% of this book were pretty futile in saving the story. It was just not good. And I find myself questioning books like this and why they get published. It was a success in that I'm sure it sold a lot of copies, and I know a lot of people have fondness for the series as sort of a nostalgia thing, but I just really don't understand this book, like, at all. Not mad that I read it. Like, I'm glad that I have read the book. I'm glad that I have some context. I will be excited probably to watch the show because I just think that conceptually it's interesting enough, but I just don't feel like, I mean, this definitely could not be published in the year of our Lord 2022. Like, the YA that's getting published right now is just so good comparatively. I'm just, I don't know. I mean, get your coin, get your bag. Like, I respect anyone who writes books, genuinely speaking. Like, whenever I say I don't understand how this book got published, it's not an indictment of the author. Like, you did that. You got published. That's a big deal. It's just more of a question of there were some missing parts, there were some missing pieces, and I am surprised that someone allowed this to be published when it could maybe have been improved upon a little bit. Does that make sense? Is that rude? I'm sorry. I really don't mean that in a mean way. I just genuinely, there's question marks. There's question marks popping up in my head after reading a book like this. And I'm not mad, like I said, that I read it. I think I'm like waffling between a 1 and a 2 star right now, because I feel like I didn't hate this book by any means. Like, it's not like abhorrent. I've only given one book 1 star this year, and when I compared this to My Year of Rest and Relaxation, like, I didn't hate this book like I hated that book, but I also don't think this book is good. It's probably one of the worst books objectively that I've read all year. Like, just from a pure craft perspective, it's a bad book. But did I hate it? No. So I think I'm gonna go with 2 stars. I don't know. It feels weird to call this a 2-star read, but we're going with it. We're going with it. And it feels weird too to segue now into a book that I am unfortunately DNFing, but I'm also, I think, making a right decision there. So I am going to DNF Courting Darkness by Robin Lefevers, which is so disappointing because I really loved the original trilogy. Dark Triumph was one of my favorite young adult books in high school. I remember reading it my senior year. A little backstory on myself. I didn't make the varsity cheer team my senior year of high school, and then I started working in my high school's library like 2 or 3 periods of the day because I just didn't have a lot on my plate, and I also wasn't in a sport anymore. And that's where I really like honed my love of reading. I'd always loved reading, but I really got to read what was new and what was coming out, and getting to like talk about books all the time really sparked my interest. And Dark Triumph is a book that I remember distinctly loving and adoring my senior year of high school. And this book follows Isabella, who was the main character in Dark Triumph. So I was like, you know what, this is going to be good. I think the issue is that it's been so long since I've read the original trilogy that trying to pick up a duology or a duet in the same world is so challenging, because I remember this author's writing being kind of like dense historical fantasy, like very heavy on the history aspect of it. And I loved that in high school because I wanted to be a history major, and that was exciting to me then. My taste has kind of changed though over time. I'm not as into the historical setting in a lot of fantasy novels anymore. This, I think, reminds me a little bit of Serpent and Dove in terms of the setting. So if you're into that sort of thing, I think this series, or I guess the original trilogy, does that sort of thing better. But I just find that now I'm not as into that sort of thing, and I don't feel like it's fair to this book and this series to read it now. Does that make sense? I'm not really understanding what's going on. I am not as attached to the characters as I used to be, and I don't really like the way that the series is set up because, again, I don't really care so much about the historical context anymore. So, all that being said, I am going to DNF this book at 12%. It was promising enough. It was going to be a story with 2 heroines, one of which obviously is Isabella, and we're dealing with her potentially losing her powers that she got from Saint Mortain. And then we have Genevieve, who's a character that we're introduced to in this book, and she is undercover at the French court, currently is kind of under Saint Mortain, but like she's not really like doing what she's supposed to be doing. We're not really sure what her purpose is, but she is feeding a prisoner, and that's kind of where I got in this book. Like, again, it not bad, probably would turn out to be a pretty interesting read, but I was just getting very, very lost in the details of the side characters and trying to understand the political machinations. Like, if you're out of the world, it's really, really hard to get back into it. So yeah, I'm feeling good about DNFing this book. I will likely unhaul this one as well. Again, not because it's bad, but I think I'm okay at this point for a lot of the books on my shelves that are like extensions of series that I used to love, with just unhauling them. You know, maybe giving them a shot, and if I'm not invested or not interested in carrying on with the series, just unhauling it. Like, it's okay to not own every single book by an author. Just because you like one book doesn't mean you have to keep all of them. So I'm feeling okay about getting rid of Courting Darkness. I have the original trilogy. I actually have Dark Triumph like right here. I'm cool with keeping that, and I'm cool with keeping the OG trilogy, but I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this one. So that is it from me tonight. I will be back tomorrow morning to wrap up this video and to give you just my thoughts, my overall general thoughts about how I feel about all of these fantasies that I honestly forgot about. Alright, it is the morning, and I am in my video intro outfit because, yes, I did film the video intro after finishing all of these books. But let's talk about this experience overall, how I feel about it, and I don't know if there's any grand revelations I have. So I actually had a really good time with this video. I hope that that was evident in the way that I talked about these books and in my attitude when reading them. I definitely had a much better reading experience for this I Read 5 Fantasy video as opposed to my last I Read 5 Fantasy video. So overall, like, I think this was a really fun thing to do, and I'm I'm glad that I got to knock 5 books off of my shelves. So I'm not going to give like, you know, a total wrap up of all of these stories, but I'm going to just kind of briefly let you know which ones I liked enough to keep on my shelves. So first up we have the selection by Kira Cass. This is gonna go. It's a paperback copy, and also I can't see myself reading this book, nor would I lend this to someone. That's kind of the thoughts that I have when I keep books on my shelves. Like, am I going to reread this? Is this something that I think other people will like, and or will my future children want to read these books? I know that's like very far in the future, but it is something I consider when I have books. The selection is going to be a no for me. It's just not a very good story, and I feel like if I were to introduce someone to YA fantasy romance, like, this is not a story I'd start with because I think it's just kind of flavorless. Next up we have Courting Darkness. This one I am going to be unhauling as well, but I don't, you know, I just wasn't the right time and the right place for this book. For me, I don't think it's bad. I think if you liked the original trilogy, you'd probably like this book too, but I think you need to read them in pretty quick succession for this to be a book that like really works for you. Next up we have For Dead Queens by Astrid Schulte. This one I enjoyed-ish. I thought it was kind of fun, but not the best ever. Again, I think like sadly none of the books in this video got more than a 3-star rating for me, but this one I think I'm gonna unhaul as well. I can't see myself rereading it. Next up we have Effortless, another 3-star read that I am gonna be unhauling. I'm glad I read it. I thought it was a fun enough time, but this is not a series that like means a lot to me. And lastly we have Red Queen, which is another book that I gave 3 stars to. This one I actually might keep because I actually am considering picking up more of the books in the series. I don't know when or if I would do this, but this is a book that I could see keeping on my shelves, that I could see loaning out to people. It does seem to be one of those like staple YA fantasy series, and I had a good time with it, so I am going to be keeping this one. So 1 out of 5 I think ain't bad, and when it comes to my enjoyment of the stories, I enjoyed honestly all of these. I really didn't dislike any of them. None of them, again, were like new all-time favorites, but I had a really good time with them, and I'm glad that even though I like forgot that I owned these, I had a fun time with them. I think my takeaway from this video is that in the future, I want to be a little bit wiser, obviously, with the books that I'm purchasing. I want to, at some point in the near future, hopefully, read all of the books that I own, and then unhaul the ones I don't like, keep the ones I do, and then I want to only buy books that I'm excited to read. It doesn't mean that I have to only buy books that I've read before, you know, to like add to my collection, but I want to be really excited about the books that I'm buying, really intentional with what I'm purchasing. I feel like growing up, my experience was always, you know, going to Barnes & Noble, only being allowed to like pick out 3 paperback books and having to like really decide between a few, and being really excited with my choices. And I want to get back to that, like the joy of buying books rather than just like mindlessly kind of collecting. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to add to your collection, but just for me, that's what I want to get to at some point. And I think my major takeaway from this video is that I had pretty bad spending habits when it comes to book buying for a while there. I've since corrected that. I don't really buy a lot of books, but when it comes to buying YA fantasy going forward, I want to make sure that the ones that I do pick up, if I pick up any in the future, you know, of my own volition that aren't already on my shelves, that they're ones that I'm like really hyped about, that I've heard a lot of good things about, that the reviews look interesting, that the synopsis is something that I'm like, oh yeah, I have to have this. Because honestly, historically, that's not really how I have approached book buying, and I'm excited to kind of change my habits after having done this video. So thank you so much for watching it. I hope it was entertaining in some way. I had a fun time making it. I love y'all so much, and until next time.